Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's JFK Jr. Forum at the Institute of Politics. Today, we will be exploring the youth vote and the pivotal role it played in shaping the outcome of the 2020 election. My name is Justin Sang. I'm a junior studying social studies, normally living in Courier House, but zooming to you from Medford, Massachusetts. This semester, I have had the honor of serving as the chair of the Harvard Public Opinion Project, one of our student-run groups at the Institute of Politics. Since our conception 20 years ago, the Harvard Public Opinion Project has provided the most comprehensive look at the views on public service and politics held by young Americans. We are best known for our biannual Harvard Youth Poll, which examines the political opinions and civic engagement of young Americans from the ages of 18 to 29. This spring, we found that while both President-elect Biden and Senator Sanders led President Trump among young voters from 18 to 29 by a similar significant margin, Biden's favorability rating was underwater. There was a real question about whether young voters would like Biden enough to show up at the polls for him. Our poll this fall found that not only did young voters grow to like him, they were quite enthusiastic about voting as well. Being chair during the campaign season has taught me that youth enthusiasm drives election results, and that the issues driving this turnout should be at the forefront of the national discourse. I am excited to welcome four speakers who share the same passion as those of us at the Harvard Public Opinion Project. These speakers have truly made a difference this year in ensuring that young voters were empowered, heard, and present at the polls to shape their future. Thank you all for your hard work and dedication. It is an honor to present today our guests. Peter Hamby is an Emmy and Murrow Award-winning political journalist. He is the host of Good Luck America, Snapchat's original series about American politics, and is a contributor to Vanity Fair. Nsé Ufot is the Chief Executive Officer of the New Georgia Project and its affiliate, the New Georgia Project Action Fund, which seeks to register and civically engage voters in a nonpartisan way. Allison recently served as the National Coalition's director for the successful Biden-Harris 2020 presidential campaign, where she led nearly 500 staff and paid fellows to guide a coalition of voters to triumph. And moderating our conversation today will be someone those of us at the Harvard Public Opinion Project are happy to call a friend, a mentor, and our millennial whisperer. John Della Volpe is a director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, where he's led the Institute's polling initiatives on understanding American youth since 2000. John was on leave this fall semester from the Harvard Youth Poll to serve as an advisor on youth engagement for the Biden-Harris campaign. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoy today's discussion.
Hey, thanks, Justin, very much for the kind introduction. And also, in a year, in a cycle, to be charitable, that was a challenge for many pollsters, especially pollsters dealing in the public space. I just want to recognize Justin's work and the work of all of the students at HPOP who made two pretty bold predictions, a month before the election. Number one was that youth would have record turnout, and two, that Biden would receive at least 60% of the vote. So in a tough environment for pollsters, Justin, your students, your colleagues with Chase Harrison's leadership really nailed it. So want to certainly recognize that at the outset. And I just want to say hi to my friends, Ashley, Peter, my new friend, Nsé. We are honored for you to join us. I mean, Ashley works for the President-elect of the United States. Peter just sat down with President Obama for a must-see interview, and Nsé is a critical member of the team that helped turn out Georgia, break all kinds of records, and will hopefully do the same in January, but also is this is the warm-up act for an interview she's about to have with the one and only Oprah Winfrey. So we are really honored by all of your presence this evening. Thank you very, very much. Hey, I just want to start from a couple of different perspectives, from a couple of different insights from my perspective, and then maybe I'll toss it to Ashley and Nsé and Peter for some similar insights before we dive into conversation. But when I began to think from leaving the polling project at Harvard to what does it take now to help elect Joe Biden, there were two challenges, two goals that I thought we had. First of which was, could we find a way to build upon the enthusiasm of young people from the 2018 midterm election? What we saw was essentially kind of a doubling of turnout from the 14 to the 18 midterm election. And could we keep that group motivated and then expand that to do the same thing in 2020, expand the electorate? Could we do that? One. The second thing is, could we hit that magic number that we've been talking about for years now at HPOP? Could we reach 60% of the vote among youth ages between the ages of 18 and 29? I've thought for some time now, if a Democratic candidate can reach that 60% threshold, that just takes some pressure off of some other groups. It makes a national coalition that much more attainable. To give you some perspective, it's only happened twice in recent memory, right? Al Gore won 48% of the youth vote in 2000. John Kerry, 55% of the youth vote in 2004. Obama, 66%, and then 60%. And Hillary Clinton at 55%. So that's always been about how close can we get to 60%? Because that, again, relieves some of that pressure. And I don't know, if someone told me that a white senator in his 70s was going to break these records and turn people out, I would have thought Sanders would have been the nominee, right? Because when we started on this campaign, and when the last survey actually that I took with HPOP, as Justin noted, young people giving Biden the benefit of the doubt, but they weren't in love with him. Ashley, we talked a lot about the soft Biden supporters, spent a lot of time with that. And there were folks that were going to give him the benefit of the doubt because they knew the alternative, but their heart wasn't completely in it from the beginning. So a big part of what we tried to do during the campaign was to was to provide background, narrative, story, vision, the plan for President-elect Biden, because so many young people didn't have that relationship. But more importantly, or as importantly, what we needed to do was to prove that government can do big things. Not only could our campaign do big things, actually, right, but government could do big things. That someone who knew how to manage and to lead government could create systemic changes within to deal with racism and police and climate, education, the economy, COVID, those sorts of things. So it was a challenge, but it was important, I think, from where we sat to try to accomplish those two things. One, create hardcore, enthusiastic supporters for Biden the person, but also to do what we could to elevate the importance of government, to say it can work and do big things. May not all be accomplished in a day, a week, even a term, but if we could prove that government can do those things, we felt we were in a pretty good position, I think, to turn people out, and we did. And then there's the last statistic, a series of stats that I'll share, and I'm sure we'll get to some other things during the conversation. There are a lot of ways that we can slice and dice the electorate. And I'm sure that we'll do that over the next hour or so. But it should be recognized that in every one of the key 5 battleground states, that the margin of votes from young people under the age of 30 was larger than the overall total of difference between Biden and Trump, right? So in Georgia, in Nevada, in Arizona, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, in each of those states, young people, a big part of a coalition, but still they helped turn those significant victories from red to blue. So Ashley, tell us a little bit, if you could, about we started talking. You start working closely together, and right before Labor Day or so, end of the summer. I remember the first conference call I had. You asked me more questions than anybody in terms of what we're going to cover in our poll. So tell me about how you thought about your job where you fit within the overall kind of coalition strategy, and how you and what you learned from the campaign that we could maybe apply to Georgia as well.
Yeah, well, the first thing I learned on this campaign is that I'm no longer a young person. I was holding on to it for dear life. I'm a millennial, but I'm not a young person. And so what that meant was that we really did need to talk to young people and really engage them. And I just want to give a shout out to our Youth Vote Director, Hannah Bristol, as well as Lubna Sebastian, she ran our Students for Biden, and Nia Page, who ran our Black Students for Biden effort. They were awesome. They built a program that really allowed young people to feel welcomed in the campaign, even when they didn't agree. So thank you all for all you all did. So in our coalition work, the thing that you said, John, that really resonated with me is that if we were able to pull as many people off and bring them into the coalition and expand it just a little bit more, it all wouldn't rely on one community. We know Black voters were really, really important, but we needed young people to be a part of that. And young people are Black, or Black people are a part of the youth vote. We knew that young people would be decisive, and that the other thing was that they weren't really feeling Biden, but we wanted to explain to them why they should. And we also wanted to see, well, what else can we do to make you feel more comfortable about telling your friends why you are supporting Biden? And we found that across coalitions that a lot of folks wanted to get behind the then vice president, but just weren't sure. They were like, I'm over politics. The last 4 years have been terrible, but I need more than just pushing against the terrible. I need my life to build back better, as we would say. And just staying on talking points wasn't enough for young people. The other thing that we learned, and we knew this, but we really were thoughtful on this approach, is that yes, there are a set of young people at Harvard, but there are a set of young people who will never step on a college campus because that's just not their path for their career. And so how do we build a program, and how do we have policies to speak to people who need student loan debt canceled, but also need to be able to have a pathway to the middle class, or, to wealth and generate wealth for their family that don't have college degrees? How do we think about people who live in the Midwest, who are used to like this, young people who are used to this a more rural lifestyle versus our coastal folks, right, who have a more urban setting? So we had to look at people within every coalition. We still dissected it in many, many different ways, because everything did need to be customized, particularly because we're doing this. The last time I did one of these panels was literally after the 2016 election, and it had a totally different feeling, let me tell you. But we knew we had to do something really intentional because we're all doing this virtually. And so if, I can have a good connection with you, but if I don't feel that authenticity, if I don't really see how we'll sink in, it wasn't going to land. So we had to try. There was a lot of trial and error. Sometimes it landed and sometimes it didn't, but we weren't afraid to try new things across the youth coalition, but also in other coalitions as well. Great.
Thanks, Ashley. Nsé, tell us your perspective from Georgia, please.
Yeah. I'm so extraordinarily proud of young Georgians, young Georgia voters. Like, they, in a lot of ways, have helped save our democracy. And I don't feel like that's hyperbole. I feel like that's legit. That is where we are. I think that they are showing pollsters, they're showing the media, they're showing their fellow citizens what a mature democracy can look like. That, like, you don't necessarily need to want to have a beer with a person in order to vote for them for president of the United States, right? That, like, the recognition that we don't need Joe Biden to be invited to our group chat. What we need for him is to go to Washington, D.C. to do the people's work. And so that clarity, that resolve, we absolutely, and that sophistication, we are seeing from young voters. And so I think that it bodes very well for the future of Georgia's elections. I will say that, we also are living in the middle of a pandemic where a major American city number of citizens, of our siblings, our neighbors, are no longer with us. And so 250,000 people are gone, have died because of inaction and the way that our administration has fumbled this pandemic. And that is very real for those of us who have lost loved ones, those of us who live in places without Medicaid expansion, like Georgia. We have 12 hospitals in rural Georgia that are about to close. There was a hospital that closed down in the rural Black Belt, down in Southwest Georgia near Albany, that closed a week before the election. And so not only is that the place where people go to get well, people are still having babies, people still have cancer, and hospitals tend to be the largest employer in rural communities. And so again, there's nothing that focuses the mind like the credible threat of death. And so while, the sort of enthusiasm that most people tend to measure or try to predict the outcome of an election, like we didn't see that. What we saw was resolve, even amongst young people. I will also just flag that we anticipated this, we saw this, right? Even Circle at Tufts University showed that half of the states in the country, 25% of the states in the country, saw an increase in youth voter registration from 2016 to the 2020 elections. And Georgia led the nation with a 35% increase in youth voter registration from 2016 to 2020. And that's our work. And I'm very proud of that. And again, and it's not a fluke. It's not soft and squishy. That it is literally the foundation that we believe the new Georgia is going to be built on.
And I think two quick things, Nsé, that really struck me. One is that young people are far more sophisticated than we give them credit for, I think, in terms of their life, but specifically politics. They vote when they can see a tangible difference between A and B, and those differences were clear. So actually in the final weeks of our campaign, when we talked about how to motivate people, it's really about the stakes, right? And it was so clear in terms of like life and death in so many cases that as you talked about before, and particularly, I found that people didn't necessarily need to have a beer with Biden, but they want him to listen, right? Yes. Make the opportunity to listen. Yes. And maybe if he was invited to a beer, he would not have a beer, of Diet Coke or something, but to listen, to be potentially kind of engage. Right. So
I would also add just really quickly that, our research is also showing that, conventional political wisdom will tell you that young people and young voters are unreliable, right? And that they're wishy-washy and their support is kind of soft. And what I think is that when you ask for their vote, and to the point that you made earlier, John, when they can see the impact of their intervention, they can see the impact of their participation, that we see higher rates. I think that campaigns, there's a reason that seniors vote and are super voters and vote in every election. And people go and ask for their vote all the time. Yeah. They follow them around. They know the podcasts they listen to. They know the papers that they read, right? They know the shows that they watch, and they ask for their vote all the time. And it appears as if the Biden campaign did that for young people this year, and they got the results that they got as a result of it.
Yeah. Peter, thanks again for joining us. We've been talking about the youth vote now for many, many years. I'm dying to hear your perspective, as a journalist, as a student of presidential campaigns, but also from your kind of pole position in terms of it being one of the primary ways in which so many young people get their news and information and their connections through Snap. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And one of my big perspectives is I agree with Ashley. When you are an old millennial, you're not a young person anymore. When I was at CNN, I was the young person covering a campaign. And now at Snap, I have a show on Snapchat, but a lot of the people who watch it are mostly between 13 and 25 years old. And when we talk about young voters, it's broken down into that 18 to 29 bracket. There's a huge difference between an 18-year-old and a 29-year-old. So, I think a common mistake that the media makes, and you guys are the strategists and tacticians, so I'll be the media guy, is referring to young voters, as a, monolithic group, when in reality, an 18-year-old Black kid from Alpharetta, Georgia, doesn't have a lot in common with a 28-year-old like white lady from Seattle. At the same time, a thing that I think the media misses, quite frankly, is the way that people talk about politics in Washington. The conversation around it is just so fundamentally different from what you guys were saying. People don't like politics as it's discussed. A lot of people, especially younger, low information voters, have low levels of social trust. They don't think politics works for them. When you are able to take issues that matter and tether it to the campaigns, I think, and John, you and Ashley would know better than me, but that's when you're able to mobilize people and get them to vote. One of the most useful things I did this year was write a piece for Vanity Fair about this, fairly quiet group called Fellow Americans. It's a bunch of former Obama alums, technologists, who basically wanted to find a way to test persuasion advertising, because persuasion advertising is usually a TV ad dreamed up by a consultant, thrown on television or on the internet, and there's no way of knowing whether it changed anyone's mind or whether it mobilized anybody. And one thing they found this year during the general election is that, among young voters, there's low levels of social trust. People think politics doesn't work for them. The kind of like Lincoln Project ads that are really popular on Twitter that just attack Donald Trump, most people don't care about that stuff. The ads that they found worked in their testing, their creative testing, were ads that took something like the movement for Black lives, they took something like climate change, and turned it into an affirmative message around voting, and connecting it not necessarily to Joe Biden, but if they did, Biden's face might not even be in the ad. But if you took these sort of movement issues that are about, life and death like COVID, and tie it to the act of voting, that gets people engaged. And the final note I'll say is that, again, when I left CNN in 2015 and joined Snap to help develop news programming for, Gen Z, basically, the biggest note I heard from people who watched the show, from people I bumped into on the street, from feedback we solicited, was, I want to see fewer politicians. I want to see fewer pundits. I want to see fewer media people. I want to see more people who look like me. And I want to hear about issues. And that could be guns. It could be mandatory minimum sentencing. It could be anything. But once you put a story around an issue, people are much more likely to give a shit about it than if you attach an issue to a politician. And that's sort of how, at least I try to think about creating news on Snap for this generation.
I would say in some of the testing we did as well, Peter, I think that you really hit a mark. One of the most effective things that we showed voters was excerpts from then Vice President Biden's speech after the George Floyd murder, where he talked about, there's a digital spot called Progress. And he talked about, at the deepest, darkest points in American history, right, we've come together, we've made progress. And he talked about Civil War, to the Depression, to the Civil Rights Movement, et cetera. And that he quoted Reverend Barber, but it said, it takes a generation, right? It's the work of a generation. And he can help lead us there, but it takes everybody, and try to kind of connect those historical moments. I think that was critical, and that was well before I ever joined the campaign. It made me so confident that there was something really great about how Biden thought about young people. It was much more authentic and natural than I think many were led to believe through that primary process. Ashley, any insights that you can offer in terms of how you thought about activating what Peter talks about, the story to the issue, in a way that these diverse communities had to kind of respond to, engage, and make a part of their own?
Yeah, so, I joined the campaign on June 1st, which was about 10 days after George Floyd was murdered. Right. So there were a lot of things that I was holding and experiences as a Black person and a Black woman in America. And so if I, the person who has been in politics for the majority of my career, who has worked at the White House, was feeling some kind of way, I know that my cousins in Youngstown, Ohio, and then the people in my hometown were feeling some kind of way. And so at that point, I just knew that it could not be business as usual. It could not be, we talk to people as though they weren't feeling the pain of seeing somebody killed the way George Floyd was killed on national television, and probably have lost their job because of failed leadership. As the vice president would say, has that empty chair at their table. Like, that's real pain. And you want me to figure out how to vote and like by mail, register to vote. I don't really know the candidates. The government is failing me now. And so we did a lot. One of the things that I was really intentional about, and like I have taken, over the 4 years I've been working in civil rights during the Trump administration, and we did a lot of listening to civil rights leaders, activists, local state groups who could talk to the campaign, and real people having conversations that weren't polls. Polling is not my thing. That's your thing. You did that. But having real conversations about like, what do you need to feel satisfied by a government that is supposed to serve you? And how can we tell the story, like tell your story about why either you weren't supporting and now you are, or you always have supported. And so we wanted to talk to real people. We did, some of our ads that were for Black media, we, had conversations with activists, and they did the wireframe for us. And then the professionals would take it to execution. But a lot of our ads had real people in them. A lot of them just told the honest to goodness truth. I mean, I remember this one ad that was of a Black woman from Pittsburgh who was just like, I was a little shaky, but here's the deal. This is why I'm voting. Black men, right? 60 days out, people started paying attention to Black men. Oh, we have a Black men problem. We have a young Black men problem. And it's like, let's talk to Black men. We had our shop talks. Let's be okay with them having authentic conversations with one another and explaining why they are where they are. Young Black women, there were stories. So we let folks be honest and authentic about where they were, even if they weren't at the point where they could say they were supporting Joe Biden. And I think that truth telling is really important. We should not require people to support us. We should earn the right for them to support us. And that is what we had to do by really listening and then letting them tell their story and their journey. And for young people in particular, our youth vote director, Hannah, always used to say this, is that young people were sometimes afraid to tell their other friends that they were supporting Joe Biden. And we needed to figure out why they were afraid to tell their own truth, right? Why were you afraid? And because if you're doing something in the dark of night, then there's something that you aren't proud about. So how could we make you feel proud about voting for Joe Biden? And so there was, a lot of it wasn't always on national television. A lot of it was in small Zooms, on phone banks, really connecting with people. But the art of storytelling is something that goes back in many people's cultures, but it really is the thing that can unify us and bring together. And I think the president-elect now, does a really good job of telling his story. And when people learned about the struggle that he's been through and so much pain that he's been through, people were really able to see, you've been in politics for a while, but you have a real life experience too. And I think that helped.
Thanks. Nsé, can you help us break down what Georgia looks like today, thinking about the election and also the future in terms of the role of the emerging demographics, why Georgia has been changing so rapidly beyond, obviously, all the good work that you and your colleagues have been doing. But help us understand a little bit about how Georgia works and thinks politically. And take yourself off of mute further. You go.
10 months of this. 10 months. Anyway, I was going to joke and say I don't know if there's anything beyond what my colleagues and I have been doing. But I'll say this. I think that oftentimes, so people outside of Georgia, Peter knows this, think about Georgia as Atlanta and not Atlanta. right? Like that is what Georgia is in the minds of most Americans, just being honest. And the truth of the matter is that it is a super, super diverse state. I think that people also think about Georgia as black and white, right, in terms of the races, and that also is not the case. So when you think about Georgia, there are 7 cities in our state. So that's first of all. But secondly, the other thing is that when people think about rural voters, it's often code for white conservative. And Georgia smashes all of that conventionally held wisdom. We have nearly over 20 counties that are majority people of color, specifically majority Black. And those counties, most of them are rural. And so in this new battleground state, the rural counties are our battleground counties, and they are not all like hardcore conservative red counties. So I think that that's really important to know, is that when we are talking about investing in Black voters, and this might seem a little hot takey, controversial, whatever, but there was definitely a point in the history of like deep South politics and Southern politics and Black Southern politics where national campaign committees, presidential candidates, right, would find their favorite pastor or their favorite activist or whoever with a trash bag of cash and be like, just turn your people out, right? And like that is how Black politics got done in the South. And that's not what is at play here in Georgia at all. And so much so that I need the world to understand that the only reason that a 13,000 vote gap between President-elect Biden and the incumbent was allowed to sustain or to stand after 3 recounts that Georgians are paying for is because of the massive infrastructure, the independent political, civil rights, voting rights infrastructure that has been built over the past couple of years by groups like the New Georgia Project and our dear friend and founder, Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight, that so a little story. In 2018, we registered 18,000 18-year-olds to vote. Not just because I like alliteration, but we had a plan, right? Like Georgia Youth Votes. And we were gonna register young people, but we didn't know how many. And then the Parkland shooting happened on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2018. And it radicalized young people in our state who were concerned about not wanting to die when they went to school and really annoyed by the lack of accountability that we saw from Georgia's elected officials. And so we registered them to vote and they got excited. They showed out and voted. They turned out their friends. And then we watched an election be stolen. And that there were consequences that emerged as a result of that. And so people were heartbroken, and it was really, really difficult to have conversations with these folks. So young people who we registered in 2018 who got radicalized, who were really super pumped and excited, fell into one of 2 categories. Like, I knew this shit was rigged. Pardon my language. I'm Southern, I'm sorry. I knew this was rigged. I knew my vote wouldn't count. And then the other people were like, I can't believe this is happening. I'm gonna register a lot of people. We're gonna keep our foot on the gas until 2020 and until 2022, because the only way that we can sort of have confidence in the result of our elections is to have overwhelming turnout while we have people that are suppressing the votes in our space. So so I need people to understand that, yes, the demographic shifts that are happening in Georgia are very real. Georgia's gonna be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority. White people are gonna make up the minority in Georgia, like 2025, 2026 at the latest. And that, over 2 million people have moved to Georgia in the past decade. Almost 80% of them are people of color. Political scientists and demographers are referring to it as the reversal of the Great Migration, right? Great Migration, 1920s, 1970s, Black people fled the South, now they're coming back. And so I would say that the demographic shift that we are seeing in Georgia is the fire, but organizing has been the accelerant. Right? That we have been able to sort of harness these demographic shifts to understand where they're happening, to understand what the opportunities are, to build pipelines. You know, millennial mayor used to be like a cute thing that people refer to. Now it's our reality in Georgia. So to explain what people are seeing right now, it is the demographic shifts for sure, but it is a sustained, sophisticated, long-term, multiple cycle organizing effort that is designed to harness the power that is coming out of that demographic shift and turn it into real policy and political changes.
Thank you. Thanks, Nsé. Hey, Peter, from your perspective, from inside Snap, were you getting indications from I don't know how you measure the metrics and the analytics within Snap, that this could be a special moment, 2020, for younger voters? And if so, maybe did you see that in 2018 and were bells ringing kind of within Snap?
Yeah, I mean, the bells ringing is a good word. Nsé mentioned Parkland. Parkland's not forgotten now in any way, but the intensity that registered among young people and teenagers was immense, and those students deserve so much credit for getting people of all races, genders, ages to care, but for getting young people to care in particular. A downside of the 2016 election is that you had a lot of people discover politics for the first time. And that means that some bad actors came in and people who love to spout nonsense on Twitter came into the conversation, but the upside is tremendous. A lot of people woke up to politics in 2016 because Trump's election felt existential. But then things started to happen that made the consequences feel real in real life. And, David Hogg was on our show in 2017 after the shooting, traveling the country in 2018, covering not just politics, but youth politics. And the fact that it became cool to care about politics, I know Ashley was saying a lot of young people might've been afraid to say publicly they like Joe Biden because Joe Biden doesn't register as cool necessarily, but politics became sort of stan culture in a way. If you like AOC or Mayor Pete or Stacey, it was cool to talk about it and post it, and they had these little fan communities on Twitter and Instagram, posting memes and graphics. It wasn't just the domain of nerds anymore. When I was in college, it's cool to care about politics. And so I started to see that a lot in 2018. We at Snap, this project was spearheaded by my colleague Sophia Gross, built some voter reg tools in 2018. We registered over 500,000 voters through Snapchat. And then we ramped that up in 2020. There's no platform in the United States that has the scale with young people that Snapchat does. 100 million users in this country. Most of them are over 18, and we have more users between 13 and 34 than Facebook and Instagram in the United States. And we built a full stack voter reg tool in Snapchat. We registered over 1.2 million voters. Interestingly, our usage was pretty heavy in red and Sunbelt states. You're welcome, Georgia. I'm just kidding. You guys did the actual work. But we had 30 million people engage with our voter reg kit, which not only educated people about the issues, it allowed them to request a ballot and make a plan to vote all inside Snap. That's crazy. And we did that. And other platforms didn't do that. So from a news content perspective, I was very mindful of keeping the focus on issues, as I mentioned before, and the political figures, and frankly, young political leaders who aren't just federal leaders, like state, local, mayoral types, putting them on the show and talking about them. But from a product and company perspective, Snapchat was, at least among the tech companies, I think a leader in thinking about getting this community involved in politics. So just to answer your question, put a finer point on it, we saw very quickly through our voter registration tools that Snapchatters were registering to vote. We went from like 0 to 1 million in like a few weeks. Like that's pretty cool. So it didn't surprise me, but because I had been living in that world, but I think it surprised a lot of people in the press who, inhabit the Twitter, cable news, New York Times axis and don't leave the bubble very much.
And from my perspective as a pollster, it's always helpful to see other forms of data coming in to essentially align with what we're seeing in terms of attitudes. Now, two of you mentioned the importance of March for Our Lives, David Hogg, the Parkland movement. Neither of you knew, though, that I think the first question is literally from Harvard student David Hogg, who, complete coincidence, because neither of you knew that. I think he is in the queue, and I've given credit for many years in terms of his strength during that first interview. Actually, I think it was on Fox News, where he said, what I'm looking for isn't sympathy. I'm looking for you to register, to vote, to call your representatives, and to further engage. So David, thanks for joining us, and love to hear your question.
Yeah, great to see you, John. Hey, Peter, how are you doing? I just wanted to ask really quick, specifically to you, John. I was wondering if you think that one thing that I worry about a lot is the sustainability of this, because I kind of think about this era a little bit like, impeached president is voted out, and then we have, kind of a liberal moderate type come in with Joe Biden that I kind of feel like might be like our version of Jimmy Carter. And then after that, we're gonna have a Reagan come along. And one concern that I have that I'm curious for your perspective on is, what are the potential risks of young people that could cause them not to turn out in 2022 and in 2024 especially? And how do you think those things can be addressed?
Great. we're going to have a handful of questions. I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to give someone else an opportunity to take that as well. There's a lesson, I think, in 2008 and 2012, right? Because 2008, we had significant youth support and youth turnout, but it flattened in 2012. And I think there's responsibility, frankly, on both sides. There's responsibility of younger people, young voters, to understand how government works, right? And to appreciate the fact that we can make progress. Sometimes change doesn't happen as quickly as we would like, but that if we continue to make progress and we continue to engage more young voters, change can happen more quickly the more younger people are at the table. So I think they need to appreciate that not everything can happen within the first couple of days, months, or even first year of administration. But the only way to ensure that it does happen is for more young people to participate. I don't know, but I think this may be the first transition ever where there's a youth coordinator, a person who's responsible as a liaison for youth to make sure that the transition is hearing what young people of all races and types and ideologies are caring about. And in my opinion, carrying that to the White House, to the administration will be critical, but it's a two-way street. I think government needs to do that, but I also think young people need to keep their end of the bargain as well and continue to vote and register and kind of use their voice. So there's a lesson to be learned from 08 to 12, but we've had two great cycles in a row, and hopefully we can continue that with engaging this community. Anyone else?
Can I just weigh in here?
Yeah.
So I totally agree what you're saying. I think we have to be careful in letting our motivation be rooted in a person. And our motivation is rooted in movements and actually like campaigns, presidential elections, like Obama was a phenomenon, was amazing. Joe Biden is a great candidate, will be a great president, but the Biden campaign wasn't around for 4 years, right? There were people like you doing the work. There were people like Nsé doing the work. There are movements in communities who are building, and the Biden campaign is gone. There are no Biden campaign organizers in the community right now doing the work. That's why the work that Nsé and that you all do for March for Our Lives is so critical. I think that there are a couple of things. Philanthropy, like after the 2016 election, a lot of resources went into states because people gave up hope in the federal government. We now, Nsé, I know you're gonna pull it out. I know you are. I'm calling it for Georgia, right? But regardless if we have the Senate, the White House, and the House, we still need to resource our local groups that are building and the trust in communities so that our movement and our efforts and our mobilization aren't rooted on one person, but in a real collective sense of power and self-ownership, and that they can withstand any candidate, because that's not why we do this work. This is bigger than Joe Biden. This is bigger than Barack Obama. This is bigger than the next person after Joe Biden. This is about us. And so we need to make sure we sustain those efforts. And that's why I love what's happening in Georgia, the local organizations being resourced and not hopefully too many national organizations coming in. But that's how I actually think we keep it going and the momentum going in 2022.
Yeah, and John, if I can just chime in real quick too, like when I mentioned traveling in 2018, like there was someone in Florida, David, I forget his name, who we interviewed and spent a day with, who's running for state legislature. He was a student at the University of Florida. Like to Ashley's point, there's movements, but there's also just like local offices too that, frankly, on the police reform front, like your county executive's going to have more impact on that than, a Senate candidate or the president. I interviewed Obama this week, and he got, at least on Twitter, like people are roasting him because he was, chiming in on the defund the police debate. But the other point he made is that like the stuff gets litigated and funded at the local level. Like that's where these fights are going to happen. And I do think a problem with politics today is that, 60% of voters didn't go to college, but the conversation in Washington and New York on Twitter is, college educated liberals who treat politics like a hobby and want to spout off on the internet without actually doing the work. And more people need to do the work, post less, do more, The internet gives you a lot of connectivity with other people, and movements are born, but they're not sustained that way. And I think the more people get offline and their local communities is where a lot of long-term work is going to be done, and don't invest too much in Joe Biden or whoever else follows him. You should invest a lot in them, but there's so many other things in politics that matter compared to what you see on the internet. And this too. I mean, you guys in Florida got at least some reform done in Tallahassee. Like that was huge.
Yeah.
And like more than happened in other states. Like that was huge. And sometimes it's okay to it's not settling to go to the state capitol and change your state laws. That's not settling. That's a huge deal.
Great. Thanks, David. Next question we have is from Hannah. Thanks, Hannah.
Hello, thank you so much for being here today to talk with us all. This discussion has been incredible, and all the work that you guys have done is obviously so impactful, so it's great to hear your perspectives. So given the tumultuous time we're in the midst of a pandemic, we obviously saw a huge shift in campaign strategies to a virtual format with more emphasis placed on social media platforms. And so I was wondering, how do you think that this played a role in the unprecedented youth voter turnout? And what can we learn from this going forward to ensure that young people continue to feel emboldened and empowered to take an active role in politics through social media campaigns?
Thanks, Hannah. Who wants maybe Nsé first and then Ashley?
Yeah. We knocked on 400,000 doors after deep consultation with public health experts, our board, our volunteers, our staff. And so, yes, I actually think that, social media is not it used to be called new media in the campaign world. And so I think that sort of phrasing and thinking about it as a new way of communicating as opposed to the way that we communicate, I think has had an impact. I think that campaigns understanding the impact of misinformation and disinformation, and how Black voters are targeted and how young voters are targeted, and having a response to that, figuring out how to cut through the noise, and figuring out how to exist on these platforms for sure was really helpful. But I don't know if that was for the benefit of young voters though. Right? Like, I think that it was because we had to. And so I worry about whether or not that is going to be sticky when outside opens back up again. And if people are like, well, we campaigned completely virtually in 2020, so maybe we won't knock on doors. Maybe we won't prioritize high quality face-to-face conversations with voters. And I think that that would be a mistake.
And so we actually did not knock on a lot of doors, did we, on the Biden campaign?
Well, we did knock on as many as I think we probably had planned to pre-COVID. Right. I do think, to Nsé's exact point, we had to make all summer, the whole campaign, the most important thing was to keep our staff, our volunteers, and the voters safe. And so after Labor Day, we made a strategic decision about following all the health guidelines, and depending on what was happening in a particular state, whether or not we were going to do in-person engagement. But, you had people on college campuses who were like locked down on their dorms, and we were kind of like, yeah, let's figure out how to, use platforms and social media, because they're like literally locked in their dorms, and they're going to be doing some studying, but we can engage with them. So I do think this is an and. I hope, and I don't think that traditional organizing, in-person, in community organizing will go to the wayside. I don't think it can, because like you can't pretend like you're always going to be in a pandemic. So that would be a false premise to start your campaign strategy on. But I do think we did learn a lot of new things in a lot of different ways in terms of groups on different platforms, chat rooms that we had in different platforms, relational organizing in terms of like reaching voters who aren't on the voter roll. If you really want to expand your outreach to folks, like how you can use relational organizing tools, how there are tools like that Snap tool is dope, right? Like, why sometimes a campaign will recreate it, but why not, like, for some nonprofit maybe to find a partnership with you to like then take the registrations that you had and like start contacting them. So I think we learned a lot of new ways. I think the most important thing though that this virtual thing required us to do is not be complacent. And not say, like every 2 weeks, I was like, I can't get on another Zoom, So I have to think of some other way to engage people. And it forced us just to continuously to be creative if we were actually going to reach. And I do think if we can like use those postmortems to really remind yourselves, like every 3 weeks, you should do a reset on creativity, would be a really great thing for campaigns to learn and not just become complacent on your strategy that might not be penetrating.
I think for all of us. That's great advice. Thanks, Ashley. And a great question. Listen, we have 5 minutes left. I want to get one more question, at least from Jing, and then leave some time for some closing thoughts as well. But we're going to go to Troy Mcdonald next, I think. Who's up? Troy?
Yeah, it is me. It is me. Yes, I'm doing great. My name is Troy Mcdonald. I am a master's student at Extension. I'm also a reporter in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm the only Black reporter who works full-time in this entire town, an on-air personality at the public radio station. And so my question centers on the problem you talked about earlier, or the young Black male problem, which I've seen firsthand in my conversations with young Black men. There is some polling data that was released this fall that showed that some young Black men under 29, some 28%, said that the GOP was welcoming to them, which is completely different than what people 60 plus thought, where I think it was like 8% thought the GOP was welcoming. So I'm curious about what you guys think about how the Democrats moving forward will reach out to African-American, especially young men, and if you have concerns over those changing poll numbers in young people feeling that the GOP is welcoming.
Troy, thanks. Can we keep these responses to like 1 minute apiece so I can get to our closing remarks, please? Thanks, Troy. Nsé.
I would just say that there's a difference between bribery and organizing. And so what we saw this summer was the Lincoln Project spending a whole bunch of money, and groups like the Lincoln Project, like bringing their favorite rappers together for these nonpartisan panels, where then these questions that are written that like attack the Democrats, and like just really ham-fisted and not sophisticated at all. I think that, saying that they're welcoming, yeah, they invited you, they had a cookout with your favorite rapper, and they invited them in. And so I think that there are there's something to be said for, the mixer, right, that you get invited to when you get introduced to an on-campus organization, or you're getting introduced to any kind of organization. And then you get in and you realize like, oh, these are not my people. And they don't mean me well. And so I think that, we should definitely interrogate what welcoming means. Like, did you get invited to a mixer? Were they hospitable? Versus like, what does it look like when they get into governing power? And what does that mean for you and your people? And those are the kinds of conversations that you have to have before Labor Day with people as you're thinking about organizing and building power in communities.
Thanks, Nsé. Ashley.
I think on January 20th at noon is the moment Joe Biden needs to start working for Democrats, and all Democrats elected need to start working to earn all people's votes. And that is going to be, there were a lot of campaign promises made, and as working on the transition now, we are being diligent to make sure that the work we are doing is done through a racial equity lens that centers anti-Blackness, that centers Indigenous people, that centers people of color, because that will allow for people's lives to be truly impacted. And when your lives change for the better, you want people to continue, you want to continue to work for those folks. People's lives did not improve under Donald Trump, which is why he is not president anymore. So Joe Biden has an opportunity to make sure that Black men, Black women, people in general, young people, allow him to, or hold him accountable to the commitments that he made. And I think he's going to do it. Not having a Senate that might not be in our favor makes it a little harder, but the things that he can do in his power, he will do. And I hope that, Democrats that are elected across the ticket will do the same.
Ashley, thanks. Hey, I'm going to bring in Mark Guerin, our director, in one moment. But Peter, is there one piece of technology that that was, identified and used perhaps in a new way, discovered, that might extend to shape the way we think about politics in the future from your perspective?
Ashley touched on this briefly in talking about innovation being like on within campaigns. I think that's actually not what should happen. There's like, for example, a fund out here in Los Angeles called Higher Ground Labs. They're for-profit and they invest in for-profit companies developed by technologists and Democratic operatives, and even just, people who aren't into politics, to create an infrastructure for Democrats with platforms like Mobilize, for example, where any campaign, state house to Senate, can just use the tech. And it can just gets used over time, and they learn from that. In the Obama years, innovation was centered in campaigns in the DNC, and then it just was allowed to wither. So I would encourage any students in particular watching this who have ideas about organizing and campaigns to sort of look at that portfolio on that website, Howard Ground Labs, and just sort of see what kind of companies they're working with, and like you can invent something too. It's something that is essential for campaigns.
Thanks, Peter. Mark, do you want to kind of join us for the wrap up here? And before that, I just want to thank Peter for joining us right on, as always. Ashley, Nsé, it's great to meet you. Say hi to Oprah for us and from everybody at the IOP and this panel, please. So thank you. But Mark, who's been our director, someone I've known from politics since I was a young person, a teenager. Mark was only a few years older than me back then. Thank you, everybody, and take it over, Mark.
Thank you, John. Well done. And to Nsé and Ashley and Peter, thank you. What a great discussion, and what a important and thoughtful way to conclude our 2020 programming. And that's what I just want to jump in to both thank you and to conclude this semester. And what a perfect way to do it, to go right to the heart of the mission of the Institute of Politics and explaining and understanding where young people are at, because our mission, of course, is to inspire young Harvard students to public purpose in politics and public service. So this was a rich conversation. It's been an unusual semester on campus, but we focused quite a bit on 2020 programming, looking at the debates with David Gergen, looking at election decisions with newsrooms with Chuck Todd and David Chalian, looking at how Republicans were opposing their president with Stephen Schmidt, or strategists like Scott Jennings and Alice Stewart, or leadership questions with our own president, Larry Bacow, and David Rubenstein and John Hennessy. So it has been a rich and important semester. We've been fortunate to have journalists like Eugene Robinson, elected officials from Deb Haaland to Ayanna Pressley. And so we are grateful to our colleagues at the Kennedy School, and most certainly to our students for the leadership they provide. Blake Barkley was our student chair with Mari Jones and Jasmine Hippolyte. They really led important decisions. And so with all of our thanks to Nanda Shitra, Kathy Park, Kelsey Donahue, Morgan Burke, our colleagues who work really hard, and most centrally to our students, because you could see tonight they asked very, very good questions. They're thoughtful about the forum. It's a pride point of the Institute of Politics. And tonight's session really brought luster to that. We look forward to the spring. We invite all our listeners and audience members back in the spring. It will be virtual again, but tonight's virtual format didn't lack for any of the energy or thoughtfulness. John, thank you for moderating, and again to Nsé and Peter and Ashley, thank you, and to everyone, good night.
Thanks.